hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very little darling, I feel that I say slowly. Little darling, it seems like your sense it's been clear. Here comes the sun. 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 Sun, 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 here it comes. Little darling, the smiles returning to their faces. Little darling, it seems like you sense it's been here. Here comes the sun, here comes the sun. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, 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 here it comes.
Okay, so the moral of the story is if you put your phone down, a garden will start growing in your office and your cares will be taken away. It's amazing. With that in mind, I would love for you to take out your phone. Right now, I actually mean it. If you would grab your phone, that would be super helpful. I want to just introduce you to who I am. And I also want to introduce my lovely wife, my beautiful wife, Kristen, who quite honestly doesn't typically travel with me. And so this is a rare opportunity. Kristen, would you mind, babe? Would you stand and just say hi to everybody? This is my beautiful wife, Kristen, and she doesn't always travel with me, so it's very rare for me to be able to do that, and I'm just thrilled that you are with us this morning. Hey, do me a favor. As I introduce myself to you, I want you to open your camera app because I want to get to know you a little bit, and I'm going to give you a way to do that in just a second. My name's Jason, and I have the privilege of serving with a network of churches called the Irresistible Church Network, of which the Rocks here in Cannington and down in Baldivis, and for those that are watching online, you are all a part of this incredible network of churches literally around the world who are all unified around this one big idea. And the big idea is this: we want to create in every community of the world at least a church. We believe every community needs at least a church that people that don't typically go to church would find irresistible, that they would love to engage with. And so if you're here this morning or you're watching online this morning and church isn't a part of your normal gig, you may have walked in this morning and experienced a few things that are a bit unusual. It's not even 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning and people are going nuts up on stage. It normally takes a few beers on a Friday night for people to sing like this, like corporate karaoke going on out here in the audience. People are singing at the top of their lungs. Some people, this is a bit unusual, especially if you're brand new to the whole church thing. There were some people singing this morning that actually had a question about the song. And so, in fact, the people leading us up on stage had a question. You'd be wondering, surely they know what they're singing about. Why do they have? Some people had two questions about the song. A couple of people in the crowd I noticed had a couple of questions about the song. Hey, if you're brand new to the whole church experience and you're thinking to yourself, how in the world do people get this excited before 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning about what they're singing about? I want you to hear this, okay? Don't miss this. If you're brand new to the whole church experience, I don't know how you landed here today. Maybe somebody said there's really cute girls that go to this church and you're like, okay, I'm in. Or maybe they promised you a free lunch. I don't know what it is. I don't know how you landed watching online. Here's what you need to know. The reason people gather together in a room like this before 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, going crazy like it would normally happen on a Friday or Saturday night, is because of a line in one of the songs that we sang over and over and over again today. There was a line that caught my attention. It said 2 words, never alone. That's why people come into a room like this and go crazy about the songs they're singing. Because many of us need to be reminded, no matter what we're facing, people around the world, we've just heard about followers of Jesus around the world facing all sorts of atrocities. We need to be reminded afresh every week that Jesus is always with us. He promised he'll never leave us, he'll never forsake us, and we are never alone, no matter what we're facing. That's why people can get crazy on a Sunday morning in a place like this if you're brand new to the whole church experience. Now, I'd love to get to know a little bit about you. So do me a favor, take your phone now that you've got it out and just scan the QR code that's going to be up on the screen. I want to do a quick survey of the audience today to get to know a little bit more about you. And it's a pretty simple survey, okay? It's actually a survey about flying. Because I get to travel and speak in different places around the world with our network of churches, I oftentimes find myself on airplanes. And so I just thought it would be fun this morning to do a quick survey. And the first question is really simple. When you get that little QR code working and you get to the form, you can fill out the survey. Don't worry, we're not going to sell anyone's information. You're not going to be asked for your email address or anything like that on the survey. Just simply answer the first question, which is, have you ever flown in an airplane before? That's a pretty simple question. And even if you've never flown before, you can still answer the entire survey. You can still be in the survey. The second question, super simple. What's your favorite or least favorite parts of flying, in the experience of flying, okay? For me, I love the takeoff. That is definitely my favorite. Any takeoff fans when you're flying in the audience? Raise your hand. A few people in the audience love. Maybe online you're doing the survey as well and you love the takeoff like me. Then tell us, what's your least favorite part of flying? My least favorite part of the flying experience is the taxiing. Maybe it talks a little bit about my impatience and my personality, but once we land, I'd like to just get to the gate and get off the plane. I'm always nervous, by the way, when we land and they tell us that our gate is not ready yet. That always makes me wonder, did they not know that we were coming? Like that, you know, the whole big plane landing thing, like I hope you'd know that we were going to be arriving. So, and then the next question on the survey is, if you had to describe 2022 as a flight, how would you describe it? Would you say that it's been smooth, maybe a bit turbulent, maybe you've been banking left or banking right, maybe there's been some change in direction? I don't know what it's been like. Hopefully nobody online watching or anyone in the room would say it's been a crash and burn. I hope that's not the case for you this year. Then think about next year, all right? And the next question talks about, what do you hope for the next year might look like when it comes to describing it as a flight? What are you hoping for in the next year? Go ahead and tell me what you're hoping for. Now, the final question, or almost the final question of the survey, is this question about what is the most commonly asked questions of a flight attendant on the plane. You may be wondering, what's the most commonly asked question of a flight attendant on the plane? You might think that it's, where are we over right now? Where are we flying over right now? Which every flight attendant will look at you and go, I have no idea. I'm not flying this plane. I have no clue where we are. Maybe, like me, you wonder why their seatbelts, the flight attendants, are far more robust than that tiny little lap belt that we get. Have you ever wondered that? That makes me a bit nervous when I'm looking at a flight attendant and they got the 4-point harness thing going on and I've just got this little thing over my lap. The number one question, here's the answer to that question. The number one question is, can I change my seat? That's the number one question that flight attendants get asked on the plane. When I get on a plane, this will give you a little insight about me. When I get on a plane, I'm the kind of person that if you want a quiet flight, you might not enjoy sitting next to me. You might just want to pop your headphones on or your AirPods in because I tend to always ask questions of the people sitting next to me. My favorite question to ask is, are you coming or are you going? That's my favorite question to ask. Are you coming or are you going? And the reason I love to ask that question, are you coming or are you going, is because when you get the answer to that question, you'll actually learn a lot more about that person. And guess what? It leads you to more questions that you can ask. Again, you may want to put your AirPods in if you see me on a plane, because I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. Here's the question I get asked every single time I get on a plane, almost every time. In fact, this last week on Friday when I was flying here to Perth, a person asked me, "What do you do? What do you do?" And the answer to that question oftentimes is a conversation killer. Because when I answer the question, "What do you do for a living?" immediately they either change maybe the vernacular or the types of words they were using in the conversation leading up, or it just kind of kills the conversation altogether. So I oftentimes tell them, I coach and I work with not-for-profit leaders around the world. They're kind of faith-based organizations. And then I lead them into, I speak in churches. That's kind of what I do. But this question, what do you do? Pay attention really quickly, just for a moment, to this question. This question is a direct reflection of the type of culture and society that we live in today. We live in a world that is completely kind of fascinated, and they are completely an externally focused culture and society. People are all about what you do, what you have, and what other people think or say about you. That's the kind of culture that we live in. Doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. Doesn't matter whether this is your first time in church ever or first time in a long time, or you've been going to church your whole life. We all collectively live in a culture and a society that is extremely externally focused on what people do, what they have, and what others think or say about them. Now, if you don't believe me, if you kind of push back and say, "You know what, Jason, I'm not sure if I totally agree with that statement," let me ask you this simple question. When you woke up this morning, what was the first thing that came to your mind? Was it perhaps something that you needed to do today? Or perhaps you had a thought about something you have on your schedule or something that you have to take care of? Or like many people around the world, perhaps you picked up your phone when you first woke up this morning and you went to whatever platform it is to find out what other people think or maybe say about that post that you posted yesterday. We live in an incredibly, extremely externally focused world. And because of this, here's what tends to happen. We tend to fall into this formula in our culture and our society today that says this, that if I do more, then I'll end up having more, and then people will end up thinking and saying more about me. Let me back up for a minute. We do more so that we can have more, and then here's the crazy thing. We do that sometimes so that people we don't even know or people we don't even like will think more and say more about us. That's kind of the society and the culture formula that we live in and that we operate in today. Now, if you're brand new to the whole church experience, maybe your first time in church or first time watching online, and you wouldn't call yourself a church person or a religious person, I want to just give you kind of a time out for a moment. You can pause the conversation. You've already got your phone out because I invited you to do that so you can check your social media, do whatever you need to do. I want to just talk to just all of the Christians, the Jesus kind of followers, maybe the church, people that would say, "Hey, I'm a part of this church thing." I want us just to have kind of a private conversation just for a moment so everybody else can check out just for a few minutes. And I want you to lean in. Let's be honest with each other, all the kind of the church people in the room. We take this formula of doing more so we can have more, so people might think more and say more about us, and we religiously complicate it. We would never get up on a stage or a platform like this. I would never get up on a stage and say this, but here's what we oftentimes do. The religious people in the room and people watching online that would consider yourself a church person, we tend to fall into the trap of doing more for God because we think that maybe by doing that, we'll have a better relationship with God, and he might even think more and maybe even say more about us. If we're being honest, we can fall into this formula pretty easily, even as religious people. Now, if you pause the conversation because you wouldn't consider yourself a church person, you can kind of check back in now. It's back in, it's an all skate. Here's what I want you to know. This formula, whether you're religiously complicated or you've just done this most of your life because of the culture and the society that we live in, this formula of doing more so we can have more, so people might say more and think more of us, this actually works for a period of time. It actually works. My story is that by doing more for God, it has led to, over the years, it led to many more opportunities to have more to do for God. And it led to more people thinking about and saying better things about me. In fact, it has taken me all around the world, literally around the world, serving God and doing ministry and being a part of churches and camps and conferences. Because when you do more, you actually tend to have more opportunities. And not just in the kind of the church Christian world, but even in general society and culture. You know that if you do more at work, you tend to have more opportunities given to you. And you tend to have people like your boss and others say more about you and think better of you. And you end up having this kind of formula work for you for a period of time. My story, in fact, is that this worked so well, this formula for me, that eventually it led me to being invited to pastor a church in Colorado Springs. And when I got to the church had kind of plateaued a little bit with growth and things. And so because of that, the leaders of that church were looking for somebody that could help to grow and kind of multiply the church. It was a great ambition. And when I got there, here's what I did. I did more for God. And so all of a sudden, we more than tripled in size in our attendance on a regular weekend like this. Because we were doing more, we had more people that would show up. And because we did that, we had more than double the amount of people that joined into community groups or connect groups, small groups throughout the week. Our generosity and our giving went up and to the right. It was fantastic. Because we were doing more, we were actually having more opportunities. In fact, one of the things that happened, similar to kind of the For Perth campaign that you have here and the Be Rich concept that you guys just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, we did a similar type of thing in the city of Colorado Springs. We called it 'Cause I Love You, or COS, which is the abbreviation for Colorado Springs, 'Cause I Love You. We started this kind of campaign of loving the city with no strings attached. In less than 2 years, more than 100 churches around Colorado Springs were all united together under this umbrella of 'Cause I Love You, loving the city with no strings attached. See, the formula, if you do more, you'll have more opportunities, and people will think more and maybe even say more about you. It actually works for a period of time. So externally, the story of my life, everything was up and to the right. Anybody would have looked at it from the outside and gone, wow, look what God is doing in and through this person, in and through this church. But what they didn't know is that internally, my life was actually falling apart. I was imploding internally. Externally, things looked great, but internally, things were falling apart. I'll never forget one evening, I was so frustrated, I was so angry about some of the internal things that were going on and some of the toxicity in relationships. I remember walking around the neighborhood with my wife, and I was complaining to her and I was complaining to God about all the things that were going on. Even though externally things were great, internally I was in trouble. I remember talking to God and thinking, God, I don't want to be a part of this if this is what it's going to do to my life internally. I'll never forget, I took my glasses off. I was so angry. And I snapped them in half, and I threw them on the ground, dropped an F-bomb at God. I was so angry, so mad. And my wife turned to me, and she said 3 powerful words in that moment to me. And all the guys in the room, if you get nothing else out of this morning other than this, here's the takeaway. When your wife says something to you, pay attention to what she says. She said to me, Jason, you need help. She probably had said that to me before, but for whatever reason in that moment, it kind of struck me. And so I made a few phone calls and began to connect with a few different leaders. And I was introduced to one particular guy who's become a friend and a mentor to me. And his name is Lance Witt. And Lance introduced me to this concept of soul care. And Lance describes soul care as this. I love this definition. You can see it on the screen. It's tending to the garden of your inner life. See, for most of my life and leadership, I had been completely focused on how do I actually harvest the forest of my external life, but nobody and I had never taken the time to learn how to tend to the garden of my inner life. I'd never taken the time to discover what does it look like to tend to the garden of your inner life. I don't know about you, but most of us live in a society that has taught us well how to harvest the forest of your external life. But not many of us have been taught how to tend to the garden of our inner life. And here's the thing I've discovered. The health of your internal life will eventually be revealed in your external life. Somewhere along the way, the health of your internal life is eventually going to be revealed in your external life. During this time, there was a story from the life of Jesus that really helped me to understand this tension between the external and the internal. And so this morning, I want us to take a look at this famous story from the life of Jesus. And you may have been so far wondering, maybe you're brand new to the church thing and you're like, hey, this is a really good TED talk or kind of a motivational speech, very Tony Robbins-esque kind of thing. But don't you normally get to the Jesus part at some point? Good news, this is the part that we get to the Jesus part, okay? So lean into this. The story is told by a man named Luke. Luke was one of the first followers of Jesus in the first century. He was a doctor. And he was a guy that took the time to write down some of the details of the stories and the life of Jesus and his ministry. One of the things I love about Luke's account, there's actually 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. One of the reasons I love Luke's account of Jesus' life is because of the detail that he gives us in the stories. In this particular story, Luke begins by telling us that Jesus and his disciples were on their way from one village to a next, which is pretty typical in the first century in the story in the life of Jesus. And Luke says these words. He says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to them. Now, unlike today when people travel around and, maybe they travel with a little bit of a posse and they book out like the whole floor of a hotel, Jesus and his crew, they didn't stay in hotels, they stayed in people's homes. And so Martha was one of these ladies who invited Jesus to come into her home. And when it says that she opened her home to them, this literally means kind of that idea of mikasa, sukasa, what's mine is yours. You get fridge rights. You can go into the fridge and get anything you need at any time. My home is available to you. And so they went in to stay with her. Now, Martha had a sister. Luke introduces us to the sister in the next part of the story. It says this, she had a sister called Mary. And notice the detail that Luke gives us in this story. It says she had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he had to say. Now don't miss this. In the first century, when a rabbi would go somewhere and begin teaching or talking, the best place to sit when it came to sitting by a rabbi was either on his left or on his right. In fact, if you've read any parts of Jesus' story in his life, you'll know that there was arguments among some of his followers who would get to sit on his left or his right, because when you got to sit on the left or the right of the rabbi, it was a seat of prominence and importance. It's kind of like the perfect Instagram moment. If somebody took a photo of the rabbi, you happen to be on the left or the right, and they tagged at Jesus Rabbi, you would be seen. Other followers would go, wow, who's sitting on the left or who's sitting on the right? But notice Mary. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus her rabbi. And then look at what Mary's doing. In the story, Mary's not looking for the Instagram moment. Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to what the rabbi had to say. It's almost as if Mary's whole focus and attention was discovering, what does it look like to live like the rabbi? I imagine Mary probably sitting so close that the dust of the rabbi might have fallen on her because she wanted to be like her rabbi, Jesus. As followers of Jesus, don't miss this. Mary's position at Jesus' feet, not so that she could be seen as a follower of Jesus, but so that she could become like Jesus. Then Luke continues the story. While Mary is doing that, it says this, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. But Jason was distracted by all of the church growth that needed to happen. But Jason was distracted by getting all of the churches in Colorado Springs gathered together to love the city with no strings attached. Great things, important things. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Not only was Martha distracted, Luke goes on and tells us that Martha was distracted, but she was pretty ticked off as well. She was pretty bold in how she spoke to Jesus. It says this, that she came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care? Don't you care? Don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Do you know how many times I've thought, God, why is it that I'm doing all the work on my own? Won't other people get involved in this ministry that we're doing in the city? And then Martha doubles down. Martha's gutsy. I don't know how long you've been following Jesus, or maybe you're checking out the whole Jesus following thing. I got to tell you, I'm not sure I'd be bold enough to speak to Jesus this way. Martha's gutsy. She doubles down and says, Jesus, tell her to help me. And then I love the response of the rabbi. He's so gracious. Jesus is so kind. Jesus says, Martha, Martha. And I actually think Luke maybe ran out of space because I kind of feel like Jesus probably said, Martha, 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 Martha. Martha, 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 Martha. You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. And then Jesus, the rabbi, he doubles down and says, actually, indeed, only one thing. Now, the final statement that Jesus has in this conversation is a key statement to understanding this tension between the external and the internal, and I don't want you to miss it. So pay attention to this final statement, so key. Jesus says, Mary, on the next slide, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. Now, before you make the same mistake I've made in reading this story, thinking that Mary good, Martha bad, Mary's the right way of doing things and Martha's the wrong way. Notice the key word Jesus uses. Mary has chosen what is better. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, hey, what Martha is doing is important and it's good and it needs and has to be done. But Mary has just chosen what is priority. Not the only thing that needs to be done, but she's chosen the priority thing that needs to be done. I'll never forget reading this story when I was there in Colorado Springs going through this kind of beginning journey of what soul care really looks like. I remember walking to my whiteboard in my office and I wrote these simple words that being with Jesus is actually greater than doing for Jesus. Being with Jesus and doing for Jesus are both important, but the being with Jesus is greater than doing for Jesus. Jesus said it this way, using kind of a garden analogy, this idea of tending to the garden of your inner life. Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And then this killer line, apart from me, you can do nothing. Here's the big idea. Our doing for Jesus, it must flow from our being with Jesus. If you want fruit that will remain, if you want fruit that is of quality, Jesus would say, abide in me. Let me remain in you and allow your doing for Jesus to flow out of your being with him. Now, here's the big question. It's 2022. So what does it look like to be with Jesus today? What does it look like to sit at the feet of Jesus just like Mary did in the first century? Today and next Sunday, I want to share with you two what I call soul gardening practices that have been transformative in my life and in this journey. And both of them come from the life of Jesus. This is what I love about Jesus. He didn't tell us what we need to do to care for our soul. He actually modeled for us when he was alive here on the earth in the first century. The way that he lived his life actually models for us what it looks like to tend to the garden of our inner lives as well. The way he related to his Father is a model, is an example for us of how we can tend to the garden of our inner lives and to be with him. So the first practice that I want to introduce you to today is a practice of silence and solitude. Silence and solitude, by the way, has been practiced for literally thousands of years as followers of Jesus. And I know that for those of you that are not followers of Jesus, I want to just kind of let you know that even if you're interested in tending to the garden of your inner life, your counselor or therapist might use the phrase or the word mindfulness. But it's the same thing that followers of Jesus have been practicing to put themselves at the feet of Jesus for literally hundreds, even thousands of years. I've put together this little card, and by the way, you don't need to take a picture of it. We're actually going to give you an opportunity to download this card at the end of the talk today. But this simple little card has been super helpful for me in figuring out what does it look like to practice silence and solitude and put myself at the feet of Jesus. This morning, we're actually going to practice this. This is going to be a little bit unusual. This is not something you typically do in church on a Sunday morning, but I want to invite you to walk through this card with me. We're just going to pause for a minute. I'm going to put a little 1-minute timer on my phone as we wrap up today. And I would love for you just to take a minute to be silent and to pause and be with Jesus here in the room together with me. I want to invite you to pick a word or a phrase that you can kind of focus on as you are pausing to be silent and just to be with Jesus. I'm actually going to use the phrase, those two words that I mentioned this morning from that song. I'm going to use the phrase never alone. You might want to use the word Jesus or maybe the word Abba, which is kind of an old historical way of speaking about God the Father. Maybe you want to use a phrase like, your love is better than life, which is a phrase from the Psalms. But pick a word or a phrase that when your mind begins to wander, which it will, I guarantee it, because my mind always wanders. It always goes to my to-do list for today. To just use that word or that phrase to kind of bring you back, focusing on his presence. And so I'm just going to set this timer for 1 minute, and we're going to begin with 1 minute of silence and solitude today. As we're doing that, I'll go to the next slide. I want you during this time just to focus on soaking in God's love for you today as you're soaking in his love during this minute of silence. And then I'd love to invite you just to surrender whatever your agenda is for today. Surrender it to him and then be open to what he wants to hear. So if you want to join me, I'm going to start the timer, and maybe you just open your hands up and we'll begin just a minute of silence together today. want to just encourage you, if during that minute of silence as your mind was maybe drifting off and you brought your mind back with a word or a phrase, I want to encourage you, you may even look down to see how long the time had been. The first time I ever tried to practice just 2 minutes of silence and solitude, focusing on God's love for me, I remember all of 28 seconds had gone by when I looked down at my watch and I thought, my goodness, 2 minutes seems like an eternity. But here's the thing about silence and solitude and practicing this and just being present with Jesus. It's one of those things that's kind of like a muscle. The more you do it, the more it grows and the more it stretches, and you'll find yourself, your soul actually, craving and desiring to spend more time in silence with Him. So I want to encourage you, if that's something that you'd say, you know what, as it comes to tending to the garden of my inner life, I need to begin that practice. I'm going to put a QR code back up on the screen and give you an opportunity just to give your email address, and we'll send you that little card. You can print it front and back, or you can keep it digital. You can save it to your phone, maybe in the photos on your phone, or